Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path and what does that even mean? So, what is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We're attempting to sort it out for ourselves here on the show. This week, we are talking about our life's purpose. So recently, Vanessa and I have been seeing this differently in our own lives, wondering why do we frequently, in our culture anyway, chase our purpose as some big identity-defining thing, particularly in the realm of career frequently. And part of why it's been so interesting for us to untie this is that the whole concept of our lives and who we are gets woven into this idea that we carry around, and I mean idea, of purpose. There's this way that we can use it to create small boxes for ourselves to live in versus letting things have their own lives. And ultimately, it leads us to figuring out how do we let life come through us instead of grabbing at it and trying to mold it all the time, which can be a surprisingly foreign thing to do. If you're enjoying the show, we would be totally delighted if you left a review for us on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to our website, blissandgrit.com, and subscribe to hear any updates on any events we might have coming up. One last note before we head to the conversation. If you're new around here, Vanessa and I use grown-up language sometimes, i.e. curse words. So if you're in a place or in company where that's inappropriate, you might want to grab your headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, dear.
Hello, dear Vanessa.
I'm having one of those weeks. I don't know if this ever happens to you sometimes where there's like nothing on your mind. I mean, obviously, there's a million things on my mind, but it doesn't seem like anything noteworthy or apparent. But as we were thinking about doing this week's episode, the concept of purpose bounced into my head, which has been bouncing into my head for a while now. I guess based on a conversation I had with Kieran Trace, I don't know, months back. So I don't know when this dawned on me. But sometime in the last year, I started to think about the topic of purpose. And I started to imagine that maybe, in fact, we don't have a purpose the way that I used to think we do. So if we look at purpose, especially in, I believe, our Western culture, and then certainly in our spiritual circles, we imagine that there's this one thing that Vanessa was put on this earth to do, right? And if you're at all like me, you've come to associate your purpose with career. I don't know why that happened too, like in our psyches, but it seems to be like not abnormal to me, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also like in our culture, let's say in the United States anyway, that's the important thing, right? Is that you figure out your career, and like I think some people would align themselves as saying like, my purpose was to be a good mother, but yes. You don't hear that, or to be a great friend. You don't hear that much. I think people are like, I need to really nail it with my career and then I have my purpose.
Yeah. Maybe just somehow the way the conversations evolved, purpose and career became just sort of interwoven. Mm-hmm. And I think I was listening to a native teacher. His name is Martin Pretchell. We had quoted him before when we were talking about grief. And he was making some reference, like he wasn't trying to discuss the topic of purpose, but he's making some reference to what life wanted from you, right? Which is kind of like our purpose, right? And he was talking about how life just wanted you to wake up and smile and like say hi to the trees and like touch them and be one with the birds. And that's all that really life wants for us.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was so interesting to me. I'm like, what if our purpose isn't so big? And I had a moment at Dharma Ocean where I had this kind of weird past life vision that also gave me pause around this idea that we have this one track sole purpose that we have to be on. So I was having this talk with Kieran few months back. And I was like, Kieran, what do you think about the topic of purpose? Like I'm starting to question my whole ideology around it. And she was like, yeah.
the way that only she can.
Yeah. Like, she's like, your purpose is found moment by moment. There's not one overarching thing. And I was like, I don't know why that strikes so deep. I mean, one, because obviously I've been holding this ideology that we have a purpose for so long. But two, I guess it's become meaningful to me. I mean, it had become meaningful to me. Let me see if I could put this into words. It's like the idea of a purpose was the escape hatch, right? Like as soon as I found the right purpose, then I'd be happy, I'd be fulfilled, like everything was going to work. It's all going to come together swimmingly. And so the concept of purpose was this beautiful little crutch. Like then I'll be special because P.S. I actually want to be special a little bit.
You're not alone, particularly in our culture.
I want to be special. So then I'll be special because I'll have this special purpose that's just for Vanessa, right? And then I'll make gobs of money because, the law of attraction tells us if you find your purpose, money's coming your way.
You can monetize the shit out of it.
So I'll be rich. And guess what? I like money. I do like money. And I'll be happy, right? Because there's very little I've identified in life as important as having, the love you need, whatever variety of that it is. For me, I really do appreciate partnership and the purpose. Like, that's it. That's what you need. And then you're all set up. And then it's all good to go, systems flowing, and you're happy. So I don't know. This was a big revelation for me. Turns out the world didn't fall apart, recognizing that perhaps we do not have just one lifelong committed soul purpose. But I think exploring the nuanced edges of this could be interesting because I don't think that we're alone in that ideology.
No. And I think before we got on the call to officially record, you and I both have some stuff up about purpose right now, which is why we want to talk about it. But I'm thinking about it as everyone thinks about their purpose or at least their work or whatever. And as you're talking, I'm like, oh, we're totally exposing one of the core delusions of our culture. Because it's all tied into everything. It's tied into time because it's in the future when I grab the brass ring. It's tied into me, the special person, and we do have cultural narcissism. That's one of our big infections. We all have it, so I don't mean it in a disordered way. That exists for sure. But I mean the sense that we need to craft identities that make us uniquely special and uniquely recognized as sort of separate from and more important than and achieving more and on the top of the mountain or whatever. We have all of that. And like you said, it's totally escape hatch thinking because it's grabby hands, right? It's like once I figure it out, or if you're somebody who feels like you are living your purpose or you're at least in the sort of broad category that your purpose is. So maybe helping people, right? And I know that my purpose is to help people and I am helping people. And that maybe there's some shifting around in what ways you want to do that, but you're like, at least I am helping people, right? I'm a yoga teacher and maybe one day I want to be a therapist or something like that. You're still have one of those days where the silence eats my head. So apologies, but you're still defining that then I will have arrived. And when you were saying that Martin Pretschel quote, I love that because it's like, not only is that what life wants from us, like the way that's stated is as if we're separate from life, like we are life. And there are those profound moments that I can have in meditation where it's like that I'm breathing or that I'm in this body or that I'm in this room right now is so amazing. Now, that doesn't mean so just sit in a room and breathe and everything's amazing. I think that we just have to let go of whenever we're creating these big containers that we're supposed to live in, it's tied to identity. And it just shuts out all the possibility that is happening as life unfolds moment to moment. So to not just be like off on a tangent and to ground this in what's actually going on for me, which is a myriad of things. We'll see which ones come up. But like, so I've been a Rolfer manual therapist for almost 17 years now. It's work I have really loved. And I just put out the final interview on a podcast that I've done, Liberated Body, which is where I talk to people who are also in the manual and movement therapy fields. I also loved that tremendously. I talked to beautiful people. I connected with beautiful listeners. So it would have been very easy for me to like grab onto that win. You know, like I was telling myself stories along the way. There were stories when I got into Rolfing about I have to help people, which is not necessarily true. Like if you're moved to help people, do help. And I'm glad that I have been assisting people in their lives. And then, but it's not like required, or else Brooke's not doing her assignment. You know, I get to exist just to exist. Like I don't have to earn my place on the planet. I get to just do whatever is right action in the moment. And so with Liberated Body, it would have been easy to also hold on to this win in a funny way. Like, okay, you know, people actually listen to this. And I found myself trying to shove it into a container like, okay, so it has to pay my bills, right? So instantly it's just not what it was, which was these spontaneous desire to learn. And P.S., I happened to do it in public. And then we start like wrestling with things like, oh, I guess my purpose is to be somebody who brings the manual movement therapy fields to the larger culture. Or
yeah, it's like a mission statement.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's like, I'm living the grand mission, or it's just for us, just those of us in the field, but we get to really have these bridging conversations between disciplines. All of these things are gorgeous, but it's like, what am I trying to say here? Me holding on to that, because if something's working, it must be because it's my assignment and I better not screw up my assignment, because then I'm not doing the thing God wants me to do. And none of those things are about like what's actually alive for me, you know, and what's alive usually surprises us, you know. So for me, that project did start thinking, maybe I'll build a business out of this thing that I love, which is spreading the word about this kind of work and having cross-disciplinary conversations. And then it just took me in this way where the more I learned about the body, the more I felt completely different about what a body even is. It led me into this whole field of somatic spirituality. Suddenly I couldn't do this sort of intellectual work that used to be so nourishing and fulfilling to me, of sifting through people's research and coming up with questions and scheduling interviews and having these intense, heady conversations. That was so nourishing to me at some point. And then at another point, and then it wasn't. And I could have forced myself to keep doing it because it was like, I've had a success at it. People care. People listen. So obviously it's my purpose. So I better keep doing it. And it's like, no, if anything, our purpose is just to listen to the thread of anything that we do as it unfolds. Like, it's not like, oh, it was a mistake, right? To be a Rolfer, or it was a mistake to make Liberated Body. None of these things are mistakes. They're all gorgeous. And they're just these beautiful, alive things in their own right that unfold, and they do their thing, and they lead you different places, and you get to evolve. And then the moment asks something different of you. So that's a long, rambling way of saying
something,
some words that are things. So glad.
Something purposey.
Doing this.
But I totally understood what you were saying while you were saying it. There's a way that we can define ourselves with our purpose. You know, as you were saying, purpose is maybe a reflection of just passion, right? Aliveness, interest.
Yeah. Like what
right?
feels
That's
yummy in a moment. Like, yeah.
Right. How else would we know our purpose? But we sort of get lost in that, the way we get lost in a lot of things, where our ego manager takes over as opposed to the alive process unfolding. So as you were describing, let's say with liberated body, then the ego manager comes in and goes, this must be my purpose because people are listening and it's being well received, right? And so what else? Why other reason?
And I've been in the field for 20 years, so I have
Yeah.
this narrative about the important purpose I'm living, you know?
Yes, must be this, right? Why else? Like when I look a gift horse in the mouth. And then because we identify with that, the other thing I've noticed is people hate changing course. It makes them feel like they're flaky.
Yeah, I know. You know what's funny is before we recorded today's conversation, I don't know why. I do know why. It's because I'm in the midst of this transition, right? But I listed all of the sort of entrepreneurial creative projects I've been engaged with for the last 20 years. So some that actually came to pass and some that were just ideas that I followed a certain way down the road, but didn't decide to pursue. And I had this narrative running before I wrote those all down. I have had this narrative of me as the flake. Me as the person who like has big ideas, but can't make it happen. And so writing them out, I was like, oh my, they're all so gorgeous and they're so perfect. And I followed each one of them for the exact right amount of time. And each one informed me and my aliveness and the way I see the world and the way I enjoy my life and the way I think about everything. Like each one was this perfect nugget. And it was so fascinating to look at the list because I have been running this narrative about like Brooke, the crazy flaky risk taker who can't get it together and like can't see a project through to the end. And I'm like, what do you mean see like liberated body is seeing a project through to the end. It
ends when it feels over.
Life. Yeah. They have their own lives in a certain way. Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. And probably we're just bumping up against cultural norms, right? So if you're following truth and aliveness, strangely enough, it's a bit of a nonconformist path.
Right.
As most people are following practicality or logic or their ego manager or safety. And so when you're actually following aliveness, like, you know what? Fuck, I just spent like $100,000 on acupuncture grad school, but I don't feel like doing that anymore. It comes across culturally as problematic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember that moment and I did spend a lot of money on grad school. And I mean, I had a successful business for I can't remember how many years, but there was this moment pretty early on into doing it where I was like, oh, this isn't what I want to do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you were there for that, Brooke. So you remember all too well. We were both in the same moment. And that felt to other people like, well, what do you mean? Like, but you just went to school to become an acupuncturist and you keep talking about how great acupuncture is. And I'm like, yeah. And I don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And something else is happening, right? And the culture will look at you askew. Now, of course, that's only a certain percentage. There's a certain percentage that is ever inspired by people following what their truth is. But it's so easy, since so many of us are self-deprecating, just to catch that whiff of, oh, there you go again, the spiritual flake who's off to do something else, and just co-opt it because our identity, again, is so linked to our decisions and to our roles. So I notice with a lot of people that I talk about this with, it's funny. It's like we all live in envy somehow of the musician who knew they were a musician at 6 and like,
right.
You know, just
and
shot
then,
up like a starlet.
Magic, which is also never the whole story. You know, if you actually hear anyone's trajectory towards success, it's filled with all kinds of nuance and ups and downs and all of that.
Yeah. But we're like looking at it. I mean, I literally have clients saying these things to me, and I have actually done this myself, where they're looking at those trajectories and holding it up as a bar and then saying, somehow I failed because I haven't found my purpose. And here I am, I'm 25, no purpose yet, which is, you know, funny because I'm 43. I thought that when I was 25. And then I don't have a purpose, and clearly I'm not a success yet. And if only I had my purpose and it was clearly identified the way these people had it, then I would be a success. So we start to make ourselves crazy over all of this stuff, and we start to beat ourselves up. And of course, the sad part is that as we get captivated by all of these delusions, we start to lose clarity for what really feels true, which is what purpose is born of? If not truth, then what?
Right, exactly. That's the complete smokescreen that just shuts everything down. And we can do it in, like when you were talking about acupuncture. So you left acupuncture, like, what has it been, a decade or something?
Yes, about a decade.
And
I was still practicing in San Francisco, but just shy.
But you were in grad school at that point for counseling and psychology. And so we were in the same wellness center. You know this, but I'm saying it for people listening. We were in the same wellness center, which Vanessa ran in Brooklyn. And I was a Rolfer then. And I did a similar thing, but it led me to a different place. So just as illustrating following aliveness, I was like, I don't want to be a Rolfer anymore. And that was born of a certain kind of burnout, which is like a real thing, particularly for people in these kinds of fields. But it was also born of these ideas of that's not enough. And the special thing we were talking about before, like I need to create something big, special, and important. Like it was this need for approval, which I think was mostly internal and also certainly external. And so I kind of made myself crazy trying to force myself out of Rolfing before it was ripe, before that was the right thing to do, because I had all these stories about how it wasn't good enough or important enough. And like, here I am, I'm still in practice. That's still how I make my living. And it's been this interesting thing where it's like Rolfing just keeps being right there. Like if I follow the moment by moment, it's like, no, it's still really true. It's still really right there. I could have these narratives about like, well, I'm entrepreneurial and I have these ideals and blah, blah, blah. And, but at the end of the day, the reason why I keep going to my Rolfing office is because that's what's true to do on that day. It's a yes. Like I want to work with these clients. I feel grateful for this kind of work. I would imagine, at the almost 17-year mark that I will evolve out of that. I can see that trajectory, but there's not that grasp towards it. Like I had better be doing something different so that I can prove that I have arrived or whatever, like some narrative is there.
Which we do so often. I keep thinking about mothers who have young children, like 0 to 2. That a lot of times when I work with mothers who have these young children, their purpose becomes their kids.
Yeah, especially in that stage.
Yeah, and that feels very disturbing to them, right? Like, but my purpose is not supposed to be my kids. Right. I'm supposed to be working and doing it all and like wanting to do this and do that. But then what happens is the aliveness is towards their children, not towards the manifestation of whatever this entrepreneurial pursuit is. So then they just beat themselves up because they feel that they should be able to do it all. And they should be, this progressive parent who has everything, which is, a whole other right. topic of conversation. Poor mothers today. But, I find it very relieving to think about purpose being found moment to moment because I'm like, well, right now, where your aliveness is with your baby.
Yeah.
And there might be a moment where that shifts for you.
Right.
And then it will be different. And there may not. And then it will be that. And it's just, I guess the way that we could use the whole concept of purpose to then be just one other way we flagellate ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like obscene. I'm thinking back to, so when I was little, I don't even know how I had this conversation with myself so young, but I had to be around 7 or 8 and thinking about what's the purpose of life, right? Like, why are we alive? The kind of big P purpose. And, sitting down with my little child brain, thinking really hard about like, what's the purpose of life? And all I could come up with was to help people. Because what else could matter enough that this whole thing was being created, right? And when I think about it now, that still remains a very important thread for me, obviously, being in service. But when I think about it now, I can imagine that in part what that little girl was doing was she was growing up in an atmosphere. She was very nervous all the time. She was in a lot of fear. She was in touch with some of the mysteries of reality and the depths. And that was a way of soothing herself, right? Of like calming myself to sort of rest on something like, okay, well, this will make the chaos of life make sense, right? If we're here for this purpose, it'll sort of organize it and it'll give me meaning to go back to like, okay, this is why I go through this. It's for that. And it's probably a good thing that that young girl had that sense, you know, I must have needed it to hold on to. But what happened is that sense of this is how I can deal with the chaos that is life, right? The ever unfolding aliveness that is life is to cling to this purpose that is helping people, turned into a structure that was built around it's my responsibility to help people. And as I've said in earlier episodes, it's like I have to earn the right to breathe by helping people. And, you know, I can't even feel someone's emotion in front of me without wanting to get involved and do something about it, right? Because I'm so energetically wired towards that because hell, that's the whole big P purpose of why we exist. And so I feel that part of why it's so interesting to untie this is that, you know, we use the word identity already, but it's like the whole substructure of how I decided life works was woven into my concept of purpose.
And what you're allowed to do and who you're allowed to be. Like you've created these parameters within which you're allowed to exist, you know, but Vanessa's not allowed to just
fart around.
Right. Be lazy, whatever. Like if you're not helping, like we do create these categories, all of us, of like, this is what the good people do. And this is what the bad people do. And then what we fill those categories with can be different depending on the person. I think for us and for most of the people listening, we have that the good people help, you know, the good people are sensitive and caring and all those things. But there are other people, it's like the good people achieve. The good people make multi-millions or billions. The good people have a 6-car garage, you know? And then there's this funny way that it's like we never let ourselves just explore the moment or just be curious about what's showing up because it's like we've got ourselves so solidly in the camp of whatever we've perceived the good people do. And we don't get to try out anything else. Like, and of course it feeds our stories. It feeds our stories about what our identity is and what's good and bad and right and wrong and which side we're on, you know, which team. Like I'm thinking about, for me, I have this, I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't want to be too public about it. It's a little private process I've had for like 3 years now where I've been designing a physical product. And I don't know why I'm doing it. Like which is interesting because there's not grabby hands, like, but I can't stop doing it. It's fun for me. It's like baking cookies. I keep finding myself working on it. And then I'll put it away for long stretches of time. And the long stretches of time are usually about, it's not what good people do because it's designing a physical product that would be for sale, right? Because good people help in a much more therapeutic relationship way, you know, be a Rolfer, be a coach, be a teacher, meaning doing the podcasts kind of thing, but don't just make something that's for sale, even though obviously it's not like I'm selling. Do you remember the Saturday Night Live skit, Happy Fun Ball? Nobody is old enough to remember this skit, but I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's a children's toy, but then it has all these like almost drug contraindication warnings at the end. Happy Fun Ball may stick to certain types of skin. If it starts to steam, get away from Happy Fun Ball and cover your head. And like, so I'm not making a happy fun ball in the world that's just like harmful. It's helpful. It's why I like it, but it's like, it's a physical product. Doesn't fit in with my narrative about what I'm allowed to be interested in. And then also it's so funny to watch like how my ego wants to grab hold of it and be like, oh, can I fit inside that identity? Again, it starts to just shut me off. Am I Brooke, the person who designed this product? Brooke, the person who made it? Meaning I have to turn my back on things like liberated body, manual movement therapy, bliss and grit, all the juicy work that you and I do together. Everything else I've ever been interested in because I need to fit neatly into a category. It's so funny. And so it's like, instead I get to just be curious and be like, I'm still engaged and I'm still working on this. Okay. Doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Yeah. Except I seem to want to work on it today.
I know. It's so funny. It's the same thing about bliss and grit. What we've mentioned this before, but what I find funny is I keep trying to even think back to how we got started, as if there was going to be some monumental moment and some sort of like real plotted out agenda. And I'm like, I sort of just remember us having a talk as we were driving to Crestone, Colorado, and being like, that would be good. And then being like, let's do that. And then picking a name and then kind of going. And I don't remember this like cataclysmic earth changing, moment. And I don't remember designing out our whole plan. And then,
yeah, God knows there's no design.
God knows
there's no plan.
Really no design. And then it's even funny because you're like, okay, well, I don't know where it's going to go. It doesn't have a purpose in the sense of, well, now I'm going to monetize this. And it doesn't have a purpose as in like, I'm going to build my whole client business off of this. Like,
yeah. And
I don't actually
try to do that. Like every time I try and lasso it into, this is what it's for. It's just like, nah.
No.
Like the project itself is like cute try, but nah.
Yeah.
And all
so
I
you're
can do
like,
is just keep going.
Right. So it's just alive. And the purpose is it, whatever that is, these kinds of ripples that you and I don't understand, and we don't actually have to understand, right? Because the purpose is found in feeling alive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the most funniest part of it all, is like, here we are searching for these purposes. Well, purpose is just something that makes you feel alive.
Right.
Then it feels like you're on purpose.
Yeah. And alive is what you are.
Yes.
So it's like it's searching for concept. Where are you going? Like it's all just is.
Yes. It's the thing.
When it lands, it's like the funniest joke ever.
I know, it's really twisted. I'm glad to be at the point where I think these things are really funny, like really funny. But true. I don't think I always thought they were so funny.
Oh my God. I remember myself in the Rolfing office in Brooklyn. I can picture myself just like this total poopy baby. Why am I still a Rolfer?
We were
such poopy babies in our 20s. Oh my God. We were just I should be doing something. Oh my God.
I know.
And I'm
wanted
like,
out
you
so bad.
Teeny little baby. Like, what?
No, you just don't say that to yourself.
Does it make you want to help, Vanessa?
It does. No, it's just, I feel like we get indications when something's not right, and something was not right. It just wasn't what you thought it was.
Right.
And what wasn't right was that part of your mind that was telling the narratives, not the raw thing.
Exactly. But and then what I had to encounter is that, like, the thing that was making me miserable was the thing that was making me miserable, it was just the racing.
The thing that was trying to escape was the thing that was making you miserable.
Right. And I could have just landed, which is obviously what I ultimately did. And it was like, oh, I like this. Like, this is really satisfying. Pays the bills pretty good. Like, it's good.
Yeah. I mean, I remember wanting to leave acupuncture, and you and I were in this hilarious state where we were agonizing. Like, it felt like time was very real and like it was dragging by. It was so funny.
I know.
It's so not a big deal, but that's how it really was for me. And I remember it didn't make any sense to leave. There was nothing to leave for or go to. And so I had to just sit, right? And let something unfold. And then, of course, it unfolded in this most graceful of funny ways, right? Like, the next alive step came forward. In fact, I was already life coaching. But what really happened was my ex-husband went to a bookstore while he was on a meditation retreat, picked up John Welwood's book, Towards the Psychology of Awakening, randomly brought me home a little gift. I read that and I knew what I wanted to do with my life. And it was just really clear. And really, then I went to see John, and then him and I talked, and then he told me about schools in San Francisco, and it just, kept unfolding because that's the way that it goes. But I remember being in that pressure cooker of wanting to leave and then trying to like force that decision out and like, what do I do? And like, muscling and agonizing and like so much effort. And in reality, how things are happening is like the most effortless thing in the world.
Yeah.
My husband brought me a book and I knew this is what I wanted to do.
And then it was, and who knows, that's the little thing, the little wink around the corner that's coming is like all these random little things that line up. I remember, I'm going to take one of Kieran's examples and then sort of extrapolate from it or expand on it, I guess. But I think she was talking about, it was when I was on retreat with her, which was totally life altering, by the way. I think she was talking about how love moves. And the example she gave was when you run into a friend, one of your most beloved friends, somebody who you're most yourself with. Kieran, I apologize for totally butchering this. We'll have you on the show and you can correct the record. But
she said she'd come on. So.
I know. Oh, yeah. It's on. And so let's say you're in the grocery store and you don't expect to see anyone you know, but you happen to run into your favorite friend who you're most spontaneously yourself with. Now, and you're both in the same aisle. Think about, you're in that moment. What you're going to do is something like, oh my God, hi, it's so great to see you. Like love just moves very spontaneously and lively towards that person. Now, if you imagine same scenario, you run into your total beloved and you try to force yourself not to spontaneously move that way and say hi, like it kind of hurts. Like it kind of feels like it feels like an actual clench. Yeah, like an actual restriction, because what you want to do is go, oh my gosh, hi, and like give them a hug. But if you're forcing yourself not to do it, it's actually physically uncomfortable. And I've been thinking about this in terms of knowing how to navigate what's alive in terms of projects, work life kind of thing, because I am on this transition point. There's a lot of threads up right now. And when I first started thinking about that, I was like, is that just too sort of Pollyanna? That everything's going to feel like this spontaneous loving movement towards something, things that are true, things that are, supposed to unfold in that way. And I'm finding that that's not true. It's not that it always has this big feeling of like, oh my God, but it wants to happen. Like when I sit down at night and I'm tinkering with this product that I'm designing, which by the way, I'm not being top secret because I'm like, someone's going to steal my product idea. It's because I'm a little self-conscious that I'm designing one at all. But it's just, what's is flowing that way. If I didn't work on it that night, when I actually felt the spontaneous movement towards working on it, it would kind of hurt. Same as, like if I were to say, Vanessa, let's not record any more episodes, like, ugh, it hurts, feels yucky. Cause like the spontaneous movement is like, I want to do this. I want to go to there. I want to move this way. And so just tapping into like the way love moves, the way it just emerges. And I have done a bajillion things in my life that were the opposite. It's pushing the boulder up the hill because of these constructs. I have to figure out a way to be doing something that earns a living that isn't manual therapy because eventually my hands are going to crap out. P.S. they are. And so, okay, people listen to Liberated Body. All right, I can design classes. Then I'm going to sell classes like this. Then I'm going to like, none of those things were spontaneous movements. That was me like hauling a sack of rocks up a hill. It doesn't feel like, just want to move towards it. So that discernment is so fascinating to me that it's just not inborn, right? Because we have all these layers of stories about how it's supposed to go, who we're supposed to be, and also about hard work and suffering and striving. So I'll keep you posted on how it goes. But right now I'm trying to only do the things that feel like when you see your dearest friend at the grocery store and you want to spontaneously move towards them and say, hi, sweetie, how are you? We'll see.
We'll see. It sounds like a really nice idea, doesn't it? I feel that I had a similar sort of insight, but almost like inverse and less refined. But I've realized that when you're trying to decide what's the voice of truth, like what's true for you versus what's fear or your ego strategy or patterning happening, you could discern it because fear or ego always makes you feel shitty when you listen to it.
Mm-hmm. It's always telling you a bad story about a bad,
like somehow you're
outcome.
Like, yeah,
be careful,
like you're kind of
beware, danger.
you have to, it's required, you must, you shouldn't, and it feels like you're getting a lecture from somebody, or someone's giving you bad news, or, like your teacher's telling you, you don't get recess today. Like, it feels crappy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I say to people all the time, and we've said it on this podcast, I'm sure, but truth is very funny in that it always feels okay. It's like,
yeah.
I've received, difficult truths. Like, it's not easy to recognize that a lot of your life was built on lies. I think it's funny because it's true.
Exactly. When it emerges as true, it's just funny.
It's just okay. And, when I talk to clients, because I'm a coach, I feel free to kind of share my opinion on things, unlike my therapist comrades that will do their best to withhold those types of things. And so sometimes when I'm sharing something, I'm pointing something out to them that might be true. And it's not like it's pleasant, like, well, what do you expect? The way that you're communicating with this person is inflammatory, just as an example. And when it's true, they're always very relaxed. It's like, yeah, that's right. And they feel it themselves. They can unwind. And it's true for me when I hear something from Kieran or when I hear something from you. It's like, so it's funny starting to notice just those little things. But for me, it's almost easier to identify what feels shitty sometimes than like what feels like, good.
Yeah.
So that's another way that you can go is like, well, if you're listening to these voices in your head and you're sitting with this conversation of what is purposeful for me right now, AKA what we mean is like, what is alive right now, can follow what you were saying, Brooke, is just that it feels good. It feels like, yes, it feels like natural, organic. I want to do this. Yes. And conversely, if you're telling yourself three different options and they all feel shitty, you're probably not speaking to yourself from the level of clarity yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, my experience, and I don't think I'm alone. I think this is sort of what's going on dominantly. I know that it is. But for me, it's been this process of discovering just how much I am indoctrinated to feeling shitty. Like, I just believed it was the voice of truth for so long.
I know.
That discerning it is really tricky, and sometimes needle in a haystack kind of tricky. It's fascinating.
Oh, it's fascinating. And you know what else I think is funny? So sometimes when like I'm talking to people about like what they want to do next, whether it's their career or whatever, and I'll say something like, well, why don't you feel into what's the most easy step for you to take? And that feels like really wrong to everybody. I mean, people will like it, but they won't do it. They'll like the idea, but most often people don't do it. And I'm like, gosh, where did we get the idea that for something to be meaningful or purposeful or of value, it's got to be the most complicated, difficult, hard task, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, I was going to use Facebook as an example. I don't know if this is a good example, but this is what popped into my head. So, people started creating Facebook, they were like goofing around at college, like creating this thing. And I don't know that they could see where it was going to go, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, but things have their own process of unfolding. Mm-hmm. We started Bliss and Grit. I really like that I'm equating this with Facebook.
Yeah, well, it's quite similar. I mean, we did just get an offer for $1 billion buyout, so it's exciting. Heady times.
Millions of users. And we didn't know where it's going to go, but it will go somewhere. And quite frankly, it's not that it didn't require setup and, investment and everything, but it was pretty easy. And we picked the easiest format. No research, no books, just talking.
Yeah.
How easy is that? Mm-hmm. We don't even like prep for a week. Like,
no. We don't read books. Okay, we're going to talk about this,
Yeah. No, if anything, it's too lax, but it's not. It's
if
not.
Anything, like look at my 15-minute rant at the beginning of this episode where I'm like, and then things and stuff and work and purpose.
What I'm going to talk about. So I think it's just funny that people have an aversion to easy as if that can't be genius, as if that's not life coming through you.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very useful thing for everyone to question.
Yeah. See, look at me with my no fancy prep. Yes.
I guess we just wrap it up there then.
Amen to that. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. If you go to the website and scroll down, you're going to see each episode's separate post, and the resources are in there, as well as an opportunity to comment on the posts. You can also come play with us on Instagram and Facebook. We're pretty readily available there, and we are Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, you can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. And if technology isn't your thing, but you are enjoying the show, well, then you can tell your friends who you might think it resonates with. We also have a new subscribe form on the website, which is blissandgrit.com, and you can sign up there if you want to stay in the loop about goodies that we have coming up for the community. We're wrapping up our first online event right now, the Being Human series, which has been really, really sweet. So we know we're going to come up with other stuff to do as well. We really have loved hearing from all of you. And so thank you to those of you who've written reviews already. Here's one which came from a comment on our actual website on a post on the Life as an Empath episode from LB. You two continue to outdo yourselves. Your honesty, introspection, and onion peeling is such a great platform from which one can challenge beliefs and behaviors in places that are dark and dusty or raw, fresh, and seeding-like. I love it. Thank you so much for that, and we'll be back next week.